Hey there, it's been a while. I'm going to do another video today, finally, after some time of not doing any videos. Today I want to talk about a topic that I've always really enjoyed, and that's perhaps the most central and most important Germanic myth, and that's the story of Siegfried the Dragon Slayer. Sometimes the story is known by other names: the Saga of the Volsungs, the Song of the Nibelungs. Siegfried is known as Siegfried, but sometimes his name in the more Scandinavian versions is Sigurd, and his love for Brunhilde. Basically, it's possible that there are some historical antecedents to this story. Some people think that there was a very ancient Germanic king named Siegfried that was murdered. There's also there was a great battle in ancient times in the 5th century. Actually, it's very, late antiquity, actually, 5th century, between a Germanic tribe known as the Burgundians and the Huns. As you know, the Huns were notorious as raiders, and they gave Rome a very hard time. But they also attacked other peoples. They attacked Germanic tribes, and there was a battle between the Burgundians and the Huns, and the Burgundians were squashed. And their capital at Worms in Germany was destroyed. Today we know the Burgundians, we know Burgundy as a place in France, but it's originally a Germanic tribe. There is also in one version of these stories, there is a hero by the name of Dietrich Von Bern. He's actually another very important hero in Germanic myth. He actually plays a small role in one of the versions of the stories I'm going to talk about. And some people think that Dietrich Von Bern is based on the Ostrogothic king Theodoric, after the Germanic tribes took over Italy, took over the Roman Empire of the West. But there are other heroes as well. I mean, we have Starkad, we have Helgi Hundingsbane, we have Rolf Kraki, and you fans out there of Vikings, there's Ragnar Lodbrok. But a lot of people feel that the most central story is that of Siegfried the Dragon Slayer. To give you a basic rundown of the story, at least the story that survived in the more northern sources, basically mostly Iceland, that's where a lot of the stuff was written down. Odin, the king of the gods, is in favor of this particular dynasty that he's kind of fostering and encouraging, and they go through some people that is before the main hero Sigurd, and it talks through their life story, and then it talks a little bit about Sigmund, who is the father of Sigurd, and then the main story talks about Sigurd and how Sigurd was a hero who became friends with this. He wanted to be a hero, and he became friends with this dwarf named Regan, and Regan says to Sigurd, "Oh, I'm going to fasten this wonderful sword, and you could kill Fafnir." And Fafnir was this horrid dragon that was surrounded by gold. Fafnir actually used to be a human or dwarf. He was brothers with Regan. Sometimes these stories, Regan and Fafnir are dwarfs, sometimes they're human. But either way, Fafnir actually starts off as a human or a dwarf, and he transforms into a dragon, the better to keep his gold to himself. And Sigurd gets the sword that Regan makes for him, and he slays the dragon with a little advice from Odin, who's looking out for him. But Regan really has another plan up his sleeve. He really doesn't care for Sigurd. He actually wants to avenge his brother Fafnir, who took all the gold for himself. So basically, Regan actually wants to murder Sigurd after he kills the dragon. But what happens is that when you kill a dragon, sometimes interesting things happen. What happened is that when Sigurd was roasting the heart to give to Regan to eat, Sigurd touched it with his fingers, touched the blood on the heart to see if it was ready to eat, and it burned his fingers, so he stuck it in his mouth. And suddenly he was able to understand the language of the birds. The birdies spoke to him and said to him, "Oh, stupid Sigurd, Regan's going to kill you if you don't kill him first. So Sigurd goes off and kills Riken, and then he takes all the gold that Fafnir had in his lair, and he goes off and he actually goes to this mountain where there's this huge wall of fire. He bravely jumps through it, and there is Brunhilde, who's going to be his love. And Brunhilde was actually imprisoned in this wall of fire because she was a Valkyrie once, and she disobeyed Odin. You don't disobey Odin. And she was imprisoned there unless somebody valiant enough could jump through the flames. So the two of them promised to meet again in the future, but for now he leaves her there. I don't know why, but he leaves her there, and he becomes friends with these tribe of people known as the Gukings. Now, what happens when he goes and meets these other people known as the Gukings? He is made to drink this potion to forget about Brunhilde so he can marry the daughter of one of the kings, the sister to the king, whose name is Gudrun. And he forgets all about Brunhilde and he marries Gudrun because of this potion that Gudrun's evil mother gave to him. Her name was Kriemhild. And yeah, she's grim, all right. So what happens is that because Sigurd forgets all about Brunhild up there on the mountain, surrounded by fire, he actually is told by Kriemhild, hey, there's this woman up there on the mountain. Why don't you help win him for my son, Gunnar? And I know there's a lot of names. It gets confusing. But anyway, to make a long story short, when Brunhild sees Sigurd again, she notices he doesn't recognize her, and she feels betrayed. Instead, he's winning her over for this other guy, who she doesn't even like. Brunhild marries this other guy, but then plots against Sigurd to be his undoing because she felt betrayed by him. So because she argues with Gudrun, his wife, and argues with the other Gukings, the Gukings finally give up, and they figured, well, why don't we just kill Sigurd, and that'll make everybody happy. So they treacherously kill Sigurd in his sleep, and that's how Sigurd dies. The story of the Saga of the Volsungs goes on a little further and talks about his children and what happened to them. But the main part of the story is over. That involves Sigurd. Basically, this is the main version of the story, if you want to read it for yourself, is actually in this saga called the Saga of the Volsungs. Sigurd's family are called the Volsungs. Sometimes Sigurd himself is referred to as Sigurd Fafnir's Bane, Bane being that he killed Fafnir. Fafnir's Bane. He's the Bane of Fafnir. And so the Saga of the Volsung, the Norse epic of Sigurd, the Dragon Slayer. And this particular translation is by Jesse Byock. I actually didn't read this version, but I read other versions. But this is on my reading list. But I've read two other versions that are older translations. Of course, another great source is, I talked about this in my other videos, the Poetic Edda. This is a collection of poems. Oh, by the way, this is written in verse. Icelandic sagas are usually in, wait a minute, did I say verse? This is written in prose. This is written in prose. See? It's written in prose. And Icelandic sagas are usually written in prose. But sometimes they have poetry in them also. This is one of the legendary sagas. But there's also a collection of poems called the Poetic Edda. And one of the heroic collection of poems in here is that of the story of Sigurd, the Dragon Slayer. There is also, in another book we have, another manuscript we have, where we learn about Norse mythology and heroes, is, I held this one up already, sorry, is the Prose Edda by one writer named Snorri Sturluson, who wrote it in the 13th century. So with these two books, the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda, you have a whole bunch of myths and legends about gods and heroes and versions of the Sigurd story. But if you want like just the Sigurd story in the most in-depth version, it's this one. To you fans out there who likes J.R.R. Tolkien, he actually has a version of the story out too. He's got two poems, The Legend of Sigurd and Gudrun, and in these two poems he actually gives his version of the story. Now, what happens is that the unfortunate thing about the story of Sigurd is that all of these sources, they don't, they don't give a very smooth narrative that has a beginning, a middle, and an end that is very cohesive and makes a lot of sense. The poems in the version in the Prose Edda is very brief. The version of the poems in the Poetic Edda has gaps in them, and the complete saga in Iceland unfortunately has certain inconsistencies about it, because the writer of this was working with different strands of the story and trying to put them together, and sometimes things don't make sense all the time. However, if you want it, now this is all great pieces of literature, but if you want the creme de la creme of this literature, then you got to go a little further south to Austria, where around the same century, in the 13th century, there was an Austrian poet who wrote this, the Nibelungenlied, which means the song lied, the song of the Nibelungs. And this is a poem, this is written in, yeah, oh, sorry, it looks like prose because this is a prose translation, but this is actually a story told in verse. So it is a masterful High German piece of poetry, and even though it looks like prose here, prose translation, and it tells the story the most amazing way, the most cohesive way, the most dramatic way. The only problem with this version is that it really veers off course from the version that is from north. See, the version that's up north in Iceland, they have a very pagan feel to them. Odin's there, and there's all kinds of Brunhild is a Valkyrie, and there's all kinds of, it feels very mythological. Whereas in this version, even though it was written down in the same century, actually has a more chivalrous feel to it. It seems to want to be more high courtly poetry, and it's been Christianized. The characters in here are Christian, even though there are a few pagan elements. There's a dragon, there's the Rhine maidens, and there's a couple of little things here and there that shows its pagan roots peeping up here and there, but it's basically a much more, it feels like a later Christianized version of the story, and the details of the story are really very different. The plot seems to move a little away from, now in here he's called Siegfried, the main hero, but that's just it. He doesn't seem to be the main hero anymore. He dies less than halfway through this book, and the story seems mostly to focus on the two protagonists, Kriemhild and Hagen. Now, who are these guys? Basically, Kriemhild, well, let me run through the story very briefly. What happens is, even the dragon slaying episode seems to be only referred to briefly. It's not a big deal anymore. Siegfried was this brave warrior. He had a ton of gold, and he was called a Nibelung. Apparently, whoever owns this gold is called Nibelung. And he kills this dragon, but instead of licking the blood and hearing the twittering of the birds and understanding their language, he bathes in the dragon's blood, and he develops this horny skin, which is impenetrable, except for a tiny little spot in between his shoulder blades. So what happens is that he marries, now in the older version, in the Scandinavian version, the woman he marries is Gudrun, but in this version her name is Kriemhild. And what happens is that he marries Kriemhild and marries into her family, and what happens is that he's never totally trusted because he's so incredibly strong. They don't really like him, but he becomes an ally of them, and he helps Gunther, the king of this tribe that he becomes friends with. He wins Brunhild. Now, Brunhild is not a Valkyrie in the story. She's the strange Amazon warrior who lives on her own island. And if you want to marry her, you have to pass a bunch of tests. And if you fail them, she's going to kill you, kind of like Atalanta from Greek mythology. Now, Siegfried had the ability to be invisible when he wanted to be. So, and because he was so strong and because he was invisible, he made it seem that Gunther passed the test. But Gunther didn't. It was Siegfried all along. And so Brunhild was beaten, and she had to marry Gunther. But later, she finds out that Siegfried is the one that really was the champion. He was the one that was made invisible. He was the one that was able to do all the amazing things, like hurl a boulder and whatever. And so she plots, just like in the other story, the other Brunhilde, she plots his death by getting this other character whose who's very loyal to Gunther, Hagen, and she gets Hagen to kill Siegfried. But you can't kill him, his horn is thick. So Hagen goes over to Kriemhild, Siegfried's wife, and says, "Oh, we're going to go hunting, and I worry so much about your husband. Can you tell me exactly the spot where he's vulnerable to being killed?" And Kriemhild says, "Oh yeah, I'll do that. Not only that, but I'll make a shirt for him, and I'll put a tiny little cross exactly between his shoulder blades where he can die." So sure enough, Siegfried goes off hunting with his so-called friends, and he goes down. He's led to a forest to get water. He bends down to drink water, and Hagen jabs him in the back with a spear. And then, like a little bitch, he runs away before Siegfried can get his revenge on him. And he gets farther away, and by the time he catches up to him, Siegfried is dying of blood, and poor Siegfried dies. And it's halfway through the book. So what goes on for the rest of the story? Well, the rest of the story is all about the revenge. Kriemhild now, what happens is that Hagen and the other, and Gunther and his people, they want to get their greedy hands on Kriemhild's gold that originally belonged to Siegfried. And now when they inherit the gold, they're called the Nibelungs now. And what they do is that they take all the gold away from her and they sink it in the Rhine. And Kriemhild marries the king of the Huns, and his name is Etzel. He's supposed to be Attila the Hun, but in this story he's called Etzel. And she agrees to marry him, all in order to get revenge on Hagen and her brothers. So this is for the rest of the book is this whole plot device on how she lures the Nibelungs, her brother Hagen, all their friends, their kids, and well, maybe not their kids, but she lures them over to the land of the Huns and has a big party. But in the end, she is trying to figure out a way to get the Huns to kill her brother and her own family. And basically, that's what the Song of the Nibelungs is basically about. Fritz Lang, the great film director who made Metropolis, he actually made two movies. The first, based on the Song of the Nibelungs, based on this book. This is a classic by the Hatto translation. But I'll have these books posted below. And he actually had to fit the whole story in two movies. The first was Siegfried and how Siegfried is murdered. And then the whole second movie is called Kriemhild's Revenge because it's all about a revenge story. So like I said, these are great books to read. If you want to read the great central myth of the Germanic Scandinavian peoples, this is it. These are the books. So until next time,